Cedar has been in the forefront of designing, formulating, and executing IT strategy for more than 50 plus clients around the world, right? We have done this in the markets across Asia, Southeast Asia, Africa, Middle East extensively, and in Europe. I think the essence of any IT strategy, if we were to look at it from a holistic standpoint, starts from being able to dovetail from what the business strategy and what the business imperatives are. It is clearly a function of where the bank is seeking to go, from a business standpoint. There could be aspirations that are actually to do with enhanced customer acquisitions. It could be to do with a much deeper penetration on certain markets or certain product lines. More increasingly, you find that there is an emphasis on driving a digital agenda and looking at a digital strategy. What is ultimately critical is the IT and the digital strategy and the roadmap. When you design a blueprint, has to essentially ensure that the alignment between the business expectations and the technology strategy is total. Now, if I was to take this one step further, and if you look at the components of an IT strategy, we normally say there are 4 elements to the strategy, right? One is about having the right application architecture, which is what software systems are required, which is as aligned as it can be to the business expectations. Ensuring the right enterprise architecture. Cedar uses its proprietary 8-layer enterprise architecture framework to determine which systems belong to which layer of the architecture, which of them need to be retained, upgraded, replaced, and making sure that you have the right vendor ecosystem built around the application architecture. What follows that is the technology architecture, or what we call as a technical or the infrastructure architecture, which is to do with what's the support environment you have. Are you looking to drive it on the cloud? What's going to be your data center and disaster recovery framework? How are you actually aligned from a network and from an infrastructure standpoint? And what frameworks or platforms are you actually adhering to in order to make sure it is contemporary, right? And these days you find a lot of emphasis being laid on driving things on the cloud, and rightly so. So an alignment between application and technology architecture becomes critical. Ultimately, who delivers then the third aspect of an IT strategy is the IT organization. So are you looking to have an organization that's completely in-house? What are the functions that are there in the organization? There could be elements that are outsourced. There are elements that need to sit within the bank. And you may also want to look at them from the standpoint of which of them are to do with the applications, to do with the technology, to do with the projects, to do with IT services, the whole area of IT risk and security management. And of course, there are pieces to do with audit and so on and so forth, right? Now, the important aspect about this is that you also have a lot of these shared service models or managed service models that also are prevalent, and making sure there is an alignment on the way the organization is structured is keeping in mind with what your cost structures are, what's your organizational ethos when it comes to the concept of outsourcing, and those are important aspects there. The fourth aspect to do with the IT strategy is really to do with alignment to what we call as governance and what sits around it, right? It really starts with alignment or having a good IT policy framework in play, making sure that you have the right kind of project management governance, the IT steering committee governance. How is the monitoring and the reporting on technology, which is increasingly not just the backbone but becoming, let's say, the driver for a lot of business initiatives themselves. So how are you actually governed, and what is actually the ecosystem in which you're operating, right? So to summarize, I think if you look at an effective IT strategy, it needs to address all 4 aspects of it. Apart from being aligned to the business expectations, or let's say business strategy, you got to have the right application architecture, the right technology architecture, the right IT organization, and of course having the right IT governance. Now, what comes out of an IT strategy initiative normally are a bunch of initiatives, and you typically classify these initiatives between priority A, B, and C. Generally, what is fast and effective and actually is not so complex but critical becomes category A. So what is critical and less complex is cat A. What's critical but also complex generally is cat B, and what's not so critical but easy is cat C, right? If something is not so critical and extremely complex, then it probably has to be revisited, right? You really don't have to spend management bandwidth and investing in stuff that is A, not critical, and B, also complex. Now, once you have those initiatives identified, having an effective implementation plan and the governance around it also becomes important, because ultimately, what's executed is what ultimately delivers. The initiatives are the means to achieving the objectives, and as they say, the proof of the pudding is in the eating.